Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Happy to have you all with us today in our webinar on the IDSA Rulebook. And let me also share my slides here. So today we have our tech talk on the IDSA Rulebook. And I'm happy to have my guest here. Today it is Marko Turpeinen from 1001 Lakes. Marko, happy to have you with us today. My name is Sebastian Steinbuss. I'm CTO of International Data Spaces Association, and doing this for a while. So my job is to support and to organize all our great working groups, and the Working Group Rulebook is one of them, working on a very interesting deliverable, the IDSA Rulebook. And today we would like to explain a little bit to you what the IDSA Rulebook is about and how it connects to various other activities. And I think today we have a slightly special focus on a tooling, on the toolbox to create rule books based on the DSSC activities. Before we dig into the details, I would like to show off a little bit because we have great research projects that support our activities, and we have those 12 projects I have here on this slide, starting with Agri Data Value, Da Capo to Pleiades, and we have so many projects supporting this activity that I even need a second slide for that to show you that we have really good projects that support our ongoing work here in IDSA. Marko, before I hand over to you, and I must admit, also in a public webinar, that we had some troubles in setting up the meeting today accordingly. So we are not too well prepared. But Marko and I, we are doing this together since a while, so we'll get that managed. Let me have one starting thing to set the scene a little bit before I hand over to you, Marko. So this is what you see on the right side here. This is our so-called magic triangle in IDSA, because it's not the rulebook that stands on its own. We have a couple of artifacts and deliverables inside IDSA. So the rulebook is the overarching concept that puts all the things together, explains what is a data space, what are the requirements towards a data space, why do we do data spaces? And then you will ask, how do I do data spaces? And this is part of our reference architecture model to describe how to build data spaces as a real good guide and best practices to build data spaces. And when you've built something, then you want to validate if this is really compliant to the rules given. And this is what the IDSA certification scheme is about. And then finally closing with implementation, with tools, connectors, for example, in our landscape or portfolio of building blocks that you can use. So this portfolio, this is not our work, so IDSA does not build code, but our members do, and also our non-members do build code and software that you can use to build data spaces. Our job in IDSA is to move all those different artifacts forward and to keep them consistent in the end. So this was my brief introduction, and then let me briefly introduce our speaker for today. I'm happy to have you, Marko Turpeinen from 1001 Lakes. I think also a full professor at Aalto University, and even more important, one of our 3 co-chairs of the Working Group Rulebook. You've been with us working on the rulebook since we started this activity a couple of years ago to really have this not technical thing, but more this business, legal, operational, functional, technical perspective view on how to build data spaces. And you're an expert here. So I would like to hand over to you now to give your presentation on what is the rulebook and how to use it. And of course, afterwards, folks, we will have the opportunity to ask some questions and to answer them. And of course, we will share the slides afterwards. Marko, floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Sebastian. I hope you can hear me well and see me well. Yes. I'm also sharing my slides here, so now I hope they work as well. Just I see nodding, so that's a good sign. So really happy to be here. So indeed, in addition to things that Sebastian mentions, I'm also a very proud IDSA ambassador. So that's one of the top things on my current CV. So I'm a data space ambassador, and I've been following the work and in being involved in the work of IDSA now for several years. and I think we are onto something really big here. So really my pleasure. And today I'm going to talk about how to build and operate data spaces, but especially from the point of view of the Rulebook Working Group that we have had ongoing in IDSA sphere now already for a couple of years. Just a very brief introduction to my background. So I come from Finland, and I'm CEO of a company called 1001 Lakes. And well, the name comes from the fact that there are lots of lakes in Finland, but also, of course, data, zeros and ones, data lakes. But then the data space story is, well, what happens when we actually need to connect 1001 data lakes together? That's a data space, and how do we make those interoperable and work in various different ways? So there we want to be experts in facilitating and creating trust in these data ecosystems. And BLOFT is one that has been used, so business, legal, operational, functional, technical. We used a slight, variation of that in our materials like BELTS, business, ethical, legal, technology, and security, but similar things. So kind of looking at these ecosystems and how to build data spaces from various different points of view. We are also involved in several projects that are currently implementing data spaces or have been quite active in the European scene in some areas, especially agriculture and media lately, but also, well, Datamite was mentioned as one of the projects that Sebastian had in his slides. We are also one of the partners in Datamite, looking especially at the data monetization mechanisms when we are having a situation where there is a data space and parties are collaborating or sharing value across organizational boundaries. And then in the rulebook side, so we've been quite active. I'll come back to that, of course, in several ways during my presentation. But in addition to the IDSA Rulebook Working Group, where I'm one of the co-leads, so we also very much involved in something that is called Rulebook for the Fair Data Economy, an exercise that started from Finland by the Finnish Innovation Fund Sitra, and we have been coordinating that work, and I'll come back to that also later today. So let's go to the topic, and I tried to leave maybe like 15 minutes for questions at the end, so I'll present now for about half an hour. And starting from IDSA Rulebook, so there's a story behind this. So it has been an activity inside IDSA already for 4 years now, and but it started really from let's make rules for IDSA as an organization, pretty much. And so what are the goals of IDSA? How does IDSA function? What's expected from the members? That was the main gist of where IDSA Rulebook was started and kind of the version 1. But then we made a shift of, gear shift. We started to think that, well, maybe instead of focusing solely on that, let's focus more also on, well, what's needed when we actually build data spaces, and what are kind of the functional requirements for data spaces. Let's have them listed in this rulebook so that it's clear for everybody. Okay, if you run a data space, if you want to get it operational, if you want to start scaling it up, these are the things that you need to set as kind of key functions, mandatory functions. These might be optional functions. And then kind of from those functional requirements also then kind of deduct and explain, well, what could this mean from the technical, operational, legal points of view. So very much looking broader into kind of helping then to understand what data spaces are and how they should function instead of IDSA as an organization. Both are good goals, but this latest rulebook is much more for the latter, and it's ongoing work. And again, so kind of outlining this common governance framework and building blocks in a way to how to build this governance framework and tell participants of data spaces, okay, these are the kinds of things that are needed when you want to set up a data space. So that's the role of this document. It's industry agnostic. It's applicable to all verticals, and that's by design. Then so as said, it has several different parts, the rulebook. So there are the functional requirements, separation of duties, quite a lot of discussion on different roles that participants might have in the data space, and what then follows if you are in this role, you are supposed to do this and this. And then this sort of separation also of mandatory and optional requirements for data spaces. And all in all, so that the question is, well, we promise kind of with data spaces that we are able to create environments where data sovereignty for participants is possible. Well, how do we implement that with different functionalities? Then it does point also to the different kinds of technical things that are happening, especially in the sphere of IDSA, kind of key documents that and other working groups that IDSA is running. So reference architecture model, the open source contributions, test beds, certification. So, but that's more like, yeah, it's just rulebook just points to that these are the activities that IDSA is running at the moment, and kind of is making the things that are mentioned in the rulebook actually possible, and goes much deeper into well, what's then needed to make those functions actually happen, for example, in the reference architecture model. Then there are discussions on operational agreements and operational aspects, and kind of also sort of process aspects. So when you want to set up a data space, when you want to operationalize the data space, what are the kinds of things when you actually want to run these data space instances? And this is still, I have to say, definitely work in progress, because we are learning all the time what the best processes are, and there are several activities that are looking into these questions, but we have started this work also in this document. And then there is the legal side. There's the legal framework coming from the regulation, explaining some of the things that are kind of maybe perhaps the latest ones, for example, related to data on European Union. Are there kind of some things that are happening outside European Union that we also want to mention in the rulebook? So there is a kind of a legal section that explains regulatory aspects around data, but then also kind of points to models and ways how these more contractual side of setting up data spaces and agreeing on things that have to do with policies around data, for example, and how those policies potentially can be enforced. So that's also part of the legal side. So this is sort of a rough view of the overall table of contents of the rulebook. And this, magic triangle already was mentioned by Sebastian. Don't need to repeat that. So kind of this is the glue that kind of brings these different parts of the triangle then together. And the working group has been up and running since 2022, and our regular schedule is that we meet pretty much every Tuesday, the first of month, so once per month, and it's open for all IDSA members. And again, the different aspects, as mentioned before, so are being worked on, developed, and we kind of moved away from like having version numbers for the rulebook. So it's a GitHub thing. It's up and running. Also evolving document, updates, change requests, just like you would have in any exercise in GitHub. So and this is a standard practice now for IDSA in general. So we just adopted that. So yeah, as said, it's ongoing work. That's a little bit outdated slide, but that's ongoing work. Guiding principles: don't reinvent the wheel. Integrate into existing systems, integrate into existing standards, but also help to guide future standards. So one of the things that clearly has been an development lately is that this rulebook working group work and the IDSA rulebook as a document has also been influential when different standardization activities has been going on, and it in parallel in being kind of very usable now and then concrete document that the companies and different ecosystems can take up, it also kind of points to the future, that when we want to standardize these things and make this sort of open standard for data sovereignty, so this rulebook is one of the founding kind of building block documents in a way, or solid stepping stones that you can take when also thinking of the standardization. So that's one of the roles that we took there. It has this a bit broader view as well, so looking into not only the business side or the legal side, technical. There is a bit of a discussion also that how does this land in the let's say the broader global setting, and but on the other hand, the value base and then some of the ideas on what could be good principles, for example, ethical principles, do actually come a lot from the fact that still the main body of IDSA members are from Europe, and I think it's a little bit reflected. But anyway, so there's some of this discussion, not much actually in the rulebook, but in the beginning, so we kind of put it also a little bit in that framework. But the whole document obviously is meant to be globally usable, acceptable, something that the partners of IDSA, no matter where they come from, can subscribe to. But I think it's good to say out loud also that in this sort of a value thinking, so maybe there is a bit of a European take on that. There is no kind of specific, let's use data spaces for only these purposes and not for those purposes. So kind of no use case, no industry sort of left out in a way, and I think that's kind of important. Well, as long as the activities are legal, of course, and then allow users to critically also reflect on what is their ethical, for example, value base when the project is started, is something that this could be helpful. It is also linked with other initiatives. So Data Space Business Alliance obviously brings together IDSA, BDVA, FIWare, GaiaX, and this rulebook is kind of feeding into that collaboration. And then even more concretely, so Data Spaces Support Center is I will come back to that later in my presentation today, but is very much also looking into the work that we've done in this working group and how to move this forward within the framework of DSSC. So DSSC came up with this latest, let's say, description of building blocks in the Blueprint 1.0, and some of the aspects of well, what is a data space blueprint are actually kind of similar or even derived from the work that we've been doing in especially the functional side of the rulebook, but especially those green building blocks that are here in this slide on the upper part, business, but definitely governance and legal questions. So those are covered quite a bit also in this work that we've been doing in the IDSA Rulebook Working Group. But this is now, there is a really strong and good plan on how do we synchronize this work. And again, I'll come back to that at the end of my presentation. Some of the dimensions of the data space governance, because that's really what rulebooks are mainly meant to do. So if you want to govern your data space, so you might have these different layers, so kind of services, sovereignty services that are essential, then kind of base services, market-specific solutions may depend on the industry, also then kind of industry ecosystems and setups. So you need to kind of cater for this layered structure. And then the other type of layers that we have is sort of when we talk about interoperability. So how do we connect or make interoperable these different 4 layers of legal, organizational, semantic, and technical? And again, I think this document that we have here and the rule book that we are building is more looking at the upper layers, so organizational level, legal level, and then the technical interoperability details often are left outside the rulebook thinking. So it's sort of any ecosystem, well, be it the tech components or semantic level, let's say convergence within any data space. Yeah, that may be a little bit different exercise, but all in all, this sort of 4 layers of interoperability, how do you actually make that happen in a data space is crucial. Then another aspect of interoperability is that that there is this sort of data space interoperability. So within a data space, how do you make it so that it's well structured, governed? We have within a data space everything kind of becoming interoperable, and then the other dimension to this is, well, what happens when you start connecting different data spaces together, and how do they become interoperable? Lots of questions there actually, and I don't think the rulebook as such gives at least not any conclusive answers, but also kind of shows some of those issues that you need to take into account also when you start connecting data spaces together, interoperability on that side. So these different activities are feeding into each other. So reference architecture is connected to reference implementations of data spaces, which is then connected to testing. It's connected to certification. It's connected to the different kinds of concrete aspects of these are the actual tools, the implementations of those building blocks. Rulebook fits into this picture, so it tries to glue these different aspects together. Then going to the functional requirements part. So here, this is the categorization that we have in the current rulebook. So the mandatory functions that are in any data space would be data sharing and usage, making that possible, establishing trust. Those are sort of fundamentals. Data contract negotiation, data discoverability, vocabularies and semantic models, and observability would be necessary. And maybe when I mentioned earlier, so semantic side. So actually it is, one of the things that we have highlighted, that when data spaces need to get it up and running, so some understanding of base semantics is often, would be necessary. Again, how detailed that needs to be, how interoperable everything needs to be, is a little bit matter of, shades of gray, but nevertheless, we raise that as one of the key functions or functionalities. And then there are optional functionalities, like marketplace is an optional functionality. It's not needed in every data space. And data trustees or escrow services is another example of, and there are several others of these kind of functionalities that can very well be connected and should be connected to data spaces, but is not kind of the key set of functions that the data space has to fulfill. Then we had this proposal or kind of scheme in the rule book that to establish trust in a data space. So first of all, there is this mechanism of self-descriptions. Data space should be able to describe itself in DSSD, data space self-description. Then the participants should be able to describe themselves, and then this allows then kind of provision of attributes to these participants based on their description, and that's then governed or overseen by something that's called Data Space Governance Authority. And then there might be trust anchors, and it's all kind of embedded in a trust framework that kind of makes these things happen. And yeah, for example, issuing credentials for different parties, that's part of the technical implementation of the trust framework. But nevertheless, so we would need to have this that there's a description of the data space, description of the participants, and then some authority that is recognized as the Data Space Governance Authority, and then that is responsible for things like setting up kind of base policies and rules. Maybe there could be kind of cases where there are exemptions to the rules, but the kind of setting up kind of base policies, rules, principles, processes for the data space, then issuing these credentials for the different members is something that the governance authority should do, and also regular regulating the life cycle of membership. So how do you become, how do you are discovered by others? If you leave, what are the kind of expected steps if you leave the data space and so forth. So life cycle of membership is something that the governance authority should take care of. And then there are some other services that might also be possible, like, this sort of observability auditing, like showing provenance, showing, different interaction logging and things like that, could be a service that the governance authority actually provides for its members or participants, but not necessarily. And others are there mentioned as well as potential additional services. But this, I think, was one of the key things that we did in Rulebook Working Group now, that we defined that there needs to be this data space governance authority. And I think this picture may kind of also explain the story a little bit in more depth. So in the middle there, data space governance authority kind of maintains the registry of participants and manages the data space. So and that then includes issuing memberships to participants who then have this self-description, and then they become members of the data space. And then their identity can be verified by the trust anchor that has been selected for the data space. And again, the data space has a self-description and an identity that is verified by the trust anchor. So and then there's the rules and policies part. So data space has rules and policies where data space governance authority, at least as said, for the basic set, for the basic processes of the data space, is sort of the authority that can define these rules and policies. Self-descriptions, well, there isn't really yet like a kind of in the rule book that this is the exact form of the self-description. Something still maybe to work on a bit more, also on the rulebook working group side. But basically, the idea is that there is this sort of way for the data spaces and participants in a standardized cross data space functioning way, also kind of explain what this data space is all about, and the participants in a similar way also explain who they are and what their role is in the data space. Policies, so this is sort of a little bit like onion picture, so or onion view. So you have the usage policies at the very center, so kind of looking at different assets, data assets, maybe AI model assets. I mean, it doesn't necessarily need to be data, but assets of the data space that are being kind of exchanged or collaborated on. Then there are contracts around these assets, and there are policies that are attached to the contracts that kind of explain what the contractual framework is for each asset. And yeah, the asset is then, actually you can then have the asset by asset usage control. That's the way you implement data sovereignty. You have access policies at the level of catalogs also, so not all data catalogs and not all items and not all kind of fields in a data catalog need to be openly available for all. So you might have different policies related to okay, for the members this is something that is seen, or if you are this type of a member, you can see these and these entries in the catalog, or then these are the information in the data catalog from this data space that are open for all, that are accessible for everybody. So just examples of different kinds of access policies at different layers. And then you have these membership policies, so criteria, for example, that what the data space governance authority has set, that these and these criteria has to be met. They have to be met before you can join as a member in the data space. As far as semantic interoperability, so some of the things that we did touch upon in the rulebook work, so kind of how do you define these policies, the membership rules, domain-specific vocabularies, access policies, contracts, and the vocabularies that are used in the data contract. So that's one side, and then there is the other side of actually sharing the information, the different kinds of metadata and description information that should be in the catalogs. about the data assets, usage policies, and then relevance of other functions, like, for example, billing functions and so forth, could also be added as, semantically interoperable metadata. Well, participants are then responsible for, adding these things related to the data assets that they bring to the data space. These can then be also then groups of participants or some associations or other sources that participants are kind of teaming up. But all in all, the idea here is that these are the kinds of things that policies and information about the data that is being used or assets that are being available that the participants should be describing. And then one thing that we did discuss quite a bit was also this, that, well, do these data space governance authorities, we actually, data space governance authority is the term that we are now using. So do they need to be, centralized, or can it be more like federated, distributed, or decentralized? And we in the rulebook working group came to the conclusion that all of these are possible. They have different characteristics and strengths and weaknesses, but it doesn't need to be so that we have like one organization that is the data space governance authority. You can have more a federated structure, kind of a consortium style structure as well, or decentralized structure. So again, I mean, it's necessary to have a data space governance authority, but there is not one single form or shape that qualifies. So these different kinds of ways on how to actually organize this are possible. And this was kind of a mapping that we did then on the different aspects related to sovereignty, resilience, scalability, control, simplicity, and discoverability via these three different models. So this analysis is part of the rulebook, but the rulebook, as said, is not like giving guidance that you need to do it in a centralized way or you need to do it in a federated way. It depends on the setup. It depends on the nature of the data space. Technical agreement. So again, I won't go into much of a detail here, but I do think that the IDSA RAM work has been influenced by the work that has been done in the rulebook working group, and the current activities in the RAM working group are definitely going fast forwards. So very strong link between the RAM and the rulebook, obviously. Similarly, the IDSG work, and here there are some aspects, for example, which has been more kind of even strongly then defined that I mentioned before, like, let's use some of these standards. Information model should be DCAT for catalogs and ODRL for policies. This is an IDSA take on what the standards should be, and also looks like that's quite broadly accepted. Yeah, that's just one aspect that when we kind of link to the rulebook and the key functionalities, then yeah, we need to have data catalogs. Our proposal is that the catalogs should use DCAT as a way to describe the assets, just as an example. So there's one kind of link to the technical implementation there already. And then, of course, there is the IDSA certification mechanisms and the different aspects that have to do with certifying different components. Again, this work is progressing, and lots of good steps forward, and certifiers are already there, and different IDSA components are being used as certified components. So all in all, but this is kind of more like a mention in the rulebook that this is a key process that IDS is providing or provide for certifying the different technical implementations. And then there is the testbed activities that IDSA has. Then on the operational agreement side, so on the other hand, so there is IDSA and its own kind of documents and how this is related to these, and then how the rule book is kind of being updated, and again, it's a living document, but maybe we do kind of a sprints twice a year. But on the other hand, so there is no kind of a version numbering anymore. So it's an ongoing updated document, as said. And then I wanted to add here one thing that then this the process view. So this is actually not in the document at this moment, but just wanted to show that when talking about processes and then kind of key operational steps that are needed to set up a data space. So I just took this from the latest from Simple because Simple Open has done recently this kind of a mapping of these are the key processes, how you set up a data space, how you set up a catalog, da 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 da. So again, this is something that the rulebook is kind of helping to define. So in these different processes, when you actually then go and step by step define what these are, so the rule book is kind of giving guidance. So yes, you need to have catalogs, and this is the function that the catalog needs to fulfill. Yes, you need to onboard participants, and it's the role of the data space governance authority to set that up. So I just wanted to make here the link between the work that we've done and the work that's now ongoing in the Simple project. And then there is this thing about intra and inter data space interoperability. Again, work in progress, definitely, and Simple, by the way, is supposed to be one of the answers here as well. So helping to be able to kind of connect and glue different data spaces together and make sure that we are also able to get the data flowing in a controlled way across different data spaces. But I don't go into details here because it's a really quite complex topic also at the same time. I want to mention here the CITRA rulebook as one of the let's say related activities to the IDSA rulebook, and especially when we have looked into the contractual and legal side. So the work that has been done in CITRA rulebook has been quite useful. So our company 1001 Lakes, as said, has been running or coordinating this work for CITRA, Finnish Innovation Fund, and it does look into the aspects of business, ethical, legal, and technical, and security, and the point is that in addition to kind of a standardized ways for data ecosystems define who they are and what the roles are, and how do we deal with ethical issues or security issues and so forth, the model which is openly available by CITRA is also including these contractual templates. So when you want to set up a data space, this is what you need to have as a constitutive agreement. If you want to onboard something, well, this is the accession agreement. If you want to define the rules for a particular data set, here is a contractual template for setting up the data set specific legal terms. So again, so this is a very generic model that we built, but again, it's linked to IDSA rulebook because then this is a very concrete tool for any data space instance that's out there to kind of clarify in our data space, this is how we do it, and these are the templates that we use, for example, for the legal side. Which brings me to the legal dimension. Of course, there is the whole story of regulatory framework, and that's obviously in rapid change now. Lots of new regulations from the EU also coming in. There's Data Act, there's Data Governance Act, there's AI Act, and so forth. Data space community needs to be aware of these and reflect these in their operations and make sure that the kind of the overall principles that we are having in our data space activities are aligned with what the regulation is proposing or mandating. One aspect here that we have been worked on also in connection with the legal group at legal expert group at IDSA has been this sort of clarification on some of these aspects. So there was a discussion paper or position paper that was published in October last year on Data Governance Act. So data intermediaries, what do they actually mean from data space point of view? Is it clear what is a data intermediary, what is not a data intermediary, and how do we currently kind of would like this to be implemented perhaps in different data spaces where we have intermediaries, and how do these intermediary service providers, DISPs, so how do they also become more and more interchangeable or interoperable when data spaces are being built. So that was a paper that was published by this working group, and is one example of kind of reflecting what's happening in the regulation side and how that links to data spaces. And similarly, Data Act is another one that, okay, so now, yeah, this data from connected devices is being opened up, but what does that mean for the participants in a data space? And should we need to be kind of somehow more prepared in general principle when IoT data is being shared in data spaces? So another example of something where the rulebook is and the Rulebook Working Group is helping also to reflect on the changing regulations. And then there is the legal agreement side. Don't go into the details because I kind of already mentioned the CITRA rulebook that has been used as a kind of a guidance to the IDSA side as well, on the contractual models that could be used by any data space when they are being set up. Just as an example, one of these in Finland, a very successful one, is a Fair Data Economy rulebook that has been used by Open Data Ecosystem for Mobility Data or Traffic Data, which is a really well-functioning data space at the national level in Finland. But yeah, there are several implementations like this already with the rulebook model. Which brings me to my last point, which is the DSSC rulebook. So based on the work that has been done in IDSA, in Rulebook Working Group, and also in other activities like the CITRA rulebook, the DSSC has now considered that since one of the things that the DSSC wants to be able to do and show is that in addition to kind of just naming that these are the important building blocks, like, yes, we need to have a governance framework, and yes, there needs to be contractual framework or contractual principles. So the green boxes here, let's also show how to implement it to the community of data space developers and operators. So then this is what's now going on in DSSC. So there is a rulebook activity that was started last month. And this rulebook tool expert group is bringing the work that has been done in IDSA rulebook, in CITRA rulebook, in other activities, lots of expertise in the DSSC context already, lots of legal expertise, lots of business expertise, lots of ethical expertise, for example. So we are bringing this now together in a joint exercise, and outcome is that by the end of this year, so we are hoping to publish a DSSC Rulebook 1.0, and this is something that definitely this IDSA group is also kind of strongly endorsing and working on. And here very concretely, so this work has started last month, and CITRA has been taken the role inside DSSC because CITRA is one of the members of DSSC to oversee this activity, but then they also subcontracted 1001 Lakes to run this activity. So we are very much involved in creating this DSSC rulebook this year. So just to summarize, so kind of, having these rulebooks is a structural approach to access and share data and maintaining data sovereignty. Kind of that's what the data space are promising to do, but the rulebook helps kind of, showing what the principles are, what the functions are that are necessary to create a data space and kind of build a governance structure around a data space. What are the requirements and obligations if you're a participant of a data space? So they are kind of, described in this rulebook. and then showing to different operational and legal aspects on how to actually run it when it's operational. How do you define these? And this is an ongoing work and will be continued in the future versions of the rulebook. And then there is this story of convergence now in Data Spaces Support Center. And I'm really kind of excited about this as well, that the work that we have done in IDSA is kind of really clearly being also endorsed and taken up by a broader community, and we build something that is applicable across the whole landscape of data spaces with this DSSC activity. So that's kind of the end of my presentation. So for the IDSA rulebook, I did mention here Mario as the key resource from IDSA side, who has been kind of coordinating the activity at IDSA. And then for the DSSC one, so I listed here Ansi from Citra and Olli from 1001 Lakes, so the key people behind the activity at the moment. So that's it from my side. I stop sharing now and give it back to Sebastian. I haven't followed whether we have any questions, but I would be more than happy to answer questions at this moment, or something you would like to add, Sebastian, based on what I just explained.
First of all, thanks so much, Marko, for the presentation. That was comprehensive. I doubt that there will be too many questions, but if you have, congrats, great presentation. If you have, just put it to the chat, to the Q&A section, or raise your hand and speak up. We had one question in the meanwhile in the chat, and I tried to give at least a short answer on that one. This is about standardization. Because there is this ongoing activity in ISO IEC JTC1 ST38. That's the one which is dealing with cloud and distributed platforms. So cloud is definitely one aspect, but I think for data spaces, it's more about the distributed platforms. And yes, this is an ongoing topic. In ST38, the topic of data spaces, and we start there with one activity, the 2151, data spaces concept and characteristics. And I can assure you that what we have worked on in the IDSA rulebook is considered as relevant input for the standardization activity. In this case, I can assure you, because I'm also an expert in that committee, and of course I bring the content from the IDSA rulebook and everything else that you mentioned rightly, Marko. So there has been a lot of work being done recently. And what I like especially is that those things are really aligned. It's not obvious every time, honestly. If you read the different document, then you don't see that they're perfectly aligned. But we see that behind the scenes, people are working together, are collaborating and shaping this clear vision and concept of data spaces to write it down in the organization, in the projects, and also in international standards like this 2151 standard. So just wanted to briefly mention that one. I still don't see another hand, so then Marko, maybe I can have one. You mentioned that this is something that is very much driven from Europe and based on partly on European legislation. And I think you answered this already, but just to make it clear. So is the rulebook only to be used inside Europe and useless outside of Europe?
Yeah, so if I wasn't enough underlining this, so the answer is it's definitely meant to be a global, just like IDSA is a global organization, we cater for the entire community of participants in IDSA. So rulebook is supposed to be a document that works across all members of IDSA, across all continents, across all data space implementations. So it's not Europe specific. On the other hand, the reason why I mentioned that there is this strong link to Europe is that the fact is that we are closely looking at what the European Union is, for example, doing around data regulation. And so it is reflected in the document that, maybe if you want to, participate in data spaces that are happening in Europe, you might want to look into something like Data Act right now. And maybe GDPR is an important thing when you have personal data. So it's mentioned, but it's not like that that this is sort of meant to be usable or applicable only in Europe. No. But yeah, good question.
And if I
There,
may,
I think, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, if I may add on this, so this is also coming back to your call to action. We have a lot of Europeans inside the working group rulebook. So if you're a non-European and have similar things like, well, you have ongoing regulations in your country that is somehow affecting the idea of data spaces, well, join us in the working group because we really want to have this international perspective on the things. And this is where we can collaborate and understand how the things could fit together.
Absolutely, and I don't think there are too many forums that are trying to do this. So a kind of, and we know that these things are being kind of discussed not only in Europe but across the globe, and the regulation trains are moving ahead in various parts of the globe as well. So well, how do we make this regulatory interoperability actually possible? What does it mean when we kind of want to be at the same time fully compliant with, I don't know, the latest legislation from Brazil, for example. So let's just make sure that that we have this international view also in the work, and yeah, more participation all across the globe. Very much welcome. There is one question also that I noticed in the chat by Frank. Oh, do you want to be the DJ, Sebastian, here? Or...
No, you can just go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So I think this is a good question that when implementing data spaces, so is it like always, does it have to be cross-organizational? But or if you have a large, for example, an international large organization that has multiple business units, very complex structure, is data space as a concept something that's implementable also within an organization to deal with some of the thorny issues? And I think, yes, I think this is actually a thing that comes more than I was expecting, that a lot of people who find data spaces are also asking, well, could this be helpful? And then obviously things like, well, what's the data space governance authority? That may be a little bit different discussion within an organization than across organizations. But, you know, my answer there is yes. A lot of what we have been doing in data spaces is also usable and functional when you consider some of the issues of data governance, networked data governance inside especially large complex organizations. That was a good question.
Yeah, and I would second that. There is also the answer that where there is a data mesh approach would also probably make sense. So of course you would have to look into the details of your setup, and there are other approaches as well. But the data space really works also inside an organization. And to underline this, we have examples of really large organizations that implement the pure internal data space to enable the collaboration of the different organizational units of those large companies. And that's helpful, at least for the learning curve, to understand how to share data inside a large organization, how to organize that, and also how to make clear what kind of rules do you have to implement inside an organization to share data and to use data.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I also see in the chat by Lucas that there is this kind of data mesh as a concept is of used and applicable, and we are good in implementing these different concepts from year to year, and which one is the hottest at any given moment is anybody's guess. But I agree. I mean, there are some really strong ideas in data mesh thinking. It has to do with data products. It has to do with kind of a distributed ownership and sense of ownership of different data assets within an organization. And there actually are kind of really conscious developments also, for example, within the DSSC on how to tie some of the latest thinking around data meshes also to the world of data spaces, so that they are not two different things. So it's kind of, yeah, we can think of data products also in the context of data space equally well. So I think, but yeah, that's a very, very good point.
There is another good question for you. Marko, could you please talk about the main profiles required to run a data space governance group?
Well, again, I mean, it really depends. So we see examples now. I give three that come to mind. So well, first of all, so Catena X, strong players, OEMs, the big organizations in the automotive sector see that this is a really strong idea, and we want to build this data space together, and therefore we need a strong centralized entity that is overseeing these activities, which is co-owned by these key actors, and that's Cofinity X. So they have set up this new entity that runs this. Then there could be a second example that I take from agriculture, where I've been kind of following this a fair bit. So AEF, which is the organization that defines standards, for example, for agricultural machinery, has now taken the role of Data Space Governance Authority in something called AGIN, so Agricultural Interoperability Network, which sort of tries to combine these different cloud services of the agricultural machinery providers into something which is interoperable and the data flows. But the centralized kind of governance authority is now this umbrella organization that already exists, that everybody subscribes to globally, is kind of trusted party, so that works quite well. And then in Finland, in the case of open traffic data ecosystem, so I would mention FinTraffic, which is actually a public sector organization that in Finland initially was kind of taken ownership of all of the open data around traffic, and kind of made sure that all of the APIs to access open data around traffic in Finland worked well. But now FinTraffic has taken this role of, well, let's expand, let's have other sources than open data, let's make it into an ecosystem, let's work on the joint use cases together, let's expand to maritime, let's have a lot of aviation parties, and see how can we then connect to also other ecosystems like logistics and so forth. As well as possible. So then FinTraffic, which continues to be government-owned entity in Finland, is the Data Space Governance Authority. So again, I don't think there is one model that fits all. It depends on the DNA, kind of where the data space is coming from, what seems to fit. And in some cases, you don't need to have a single entity, as I said. So it might be kind of just, well, at least for a temporary thing. So for the first 3 years, the plan is let's have just a consortium agreement between these parties, who then jointly as a consortium form the governance authority. So that's more like a distributed model.
So yeah, Marko,
good question, but I couldn't come up with a short answer, but I hope that answered at least partially what you were asking.
Yeah, I think so. So I think the answer was, in short, well, it depends.
It depends, but I think that's the strength of the concept as well. So that you need one, but there is not like one model that everybody needs to subscribe to. There are different models.
Yes, and we are working on that. So this is something that pops up recently a lot, so that we talk about kind of different configurations of data spaces from the various perspectives. May it be a technical discussion or a legal discussion, if we want to create those contracts. So, well, it depends, but we identify step by step recurring configurations of data spaces and also of such setups. We are running slightly out of time, Marko. I tried to answer a couple of questions also in the chat. So definitely, Marko and we will be open for questions also after the meeting. Just reach out and let's get into contact. Of course, feel free to join IDSA, to join our working group, to continuously discuss about such things. We have one exercise, and I think that is a good proposal, to have a short text about the data mesh concept and the data spaces concept and how they relate to each other. That could be really an interesting exercise. So we will definitely follow up on that one to explain this a little bit more, to get some clarity.
So I'm Sebastian on that one. I do think there actually is one already. I need to find it, but stay tuned with the chat maybe after the meeting. So I'll post it here in the chat. So I think there is one blog post at least that I'm aware of, which is sort of looking at data spaces and data mesh concepts side by side.
Yeah, if we find it, share it with us. We will put it to the chat. We will share it on LinkedIn, in our blog post, whatever, to make this available to everyone. Because, I mean, this is the most important thing. We need to talk about data spaces. We need to share knowledge about data spaces, get a common understanding on data spaces, share the common challenges that we have to find solutions on that in the end. But before we close, because I think I'll get serious punishment if I don't show my last and final slides, not about the questions and comments, but I said before, so we need to share knowledge and common understanding. We have a couple of great activities upcoming. There is this Seona X European Data Summit in the upcoming week on Tuesday, May 21. The IoT Solution World Congress in Barcelona in the next week with a couple on roundtables, presentations, booth on the topic of data spaces when you want to learn more. There is a network summit then afterwards also in Barcelona in May. There's the Belgium Data Spaces Day. We are international, so it's not only about Europe. We have the CSC Tokyo Summit. We have the launch event of the IDSA Competence Center in Portugal. And also today we have 2 webinars, this Tech Talk that you just joined, and we have the first ABINC webinar, which is the Brazilian Association for the Internet of Things. So this is our Brazilian hub on international data spaces. It's really international, and Brazil is doing a lot at the moment. So if you're fluent in Portuguese, join this ABINC webinar and see what is happening in Brazil. If you want to learn more, we have our ongoing Q&A session, also the next one next Tuesday, where you can just join, ask questions, get answers and advice. And we have the next upcoming Tech Talk on May 29th. And finally, this is the IDSA Open Month that we have. So our ecosystem building call that is conducted every Monday from 9 to 10 European time is open to non-members. We have very interesting topics next week on the level of interoperability. The one who asked the question with interoperability, we will come back to that one next Monday at 9. So join in there and discuss here with us. And the last one on June 3rd, from theory to practice. So a lot of other activities where you can join in. So let us close for today. Marko, again, thank you so much for the presentation and for the insights. That was super helpful and I assume super interesting for everyone. Thanks to all of you for joining today, for listening, for asking questions, and thanks for being with us today. So I think with that, we can close.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Take it easy, folks.
Bye.